Will President Trump's meeting with Putin pave the way for peace in Ukraine? In this video, Secretary of State Marco Rubio sits down with Maria Bartiromo to reveal the likelihood, requirements, and far-reaching implications of a Russia-Ukraine peace deal, plus discover how the leadership principle of courage shapes these high-stakes meetings. Before we get into the details, if you love diving into political issues and enjoy hearing a principled take on them, then hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to join the conversation. It will help our channel reach a wider audience.
Why did President Trump's meeting with Putin end with no ceasefire? And what does Putin want?
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, if you recall, there's no way you can have a meeting like that. And we never said there was going to be a deal coming out of the meeting because the Ukrainians are not there. This is a war between two countries. It's not America. It's Ukraine and Russia. We met with the Russian side. We've spoken repeatedly with the Ukrainian side. We'll see them again tomorrow in person, along with our allies in Europe. So I do think some progress was made in that talk. In terms of narrowing down the issues set, and now these are hard issues that remain. You know, the conversation about where the territorial lines are going to be, questions about long-term security guarantees and who Ukraine can have military alliances with, things like that. These are difficult things, but I do believe we made progress in narrowing down the issue set, but there's a lot of work that remains. There's a reason why this war has been going on for 3.5 years. It's a war that never would have happened had President Trump been president, but he inherited it, and now he's trying to do everything he can to bring about peace. He's made peace a priority of his administration, as you've seen with all the peace deals we've been able to achieve throughout the world. This one's the hardest one. Everyone acknowledges that. But he's the only one in the world that has any chance of doing it. Look, peace may not be possible at the end of the day. We don't know. But if it is possible, he's the only one that can get it done. And that's why everyone's asking him. They're asking him to meet with Putin. And they're also asking him to come here tomorrow and meet with him to talk further about what we do next.
A European diplomat has confirmed to Fox that President Trump supports Putin's proposal for Russia to take full control of Luhansk and Donetsk, all of Donbass. Do you support this move?
No, first of all, I don't know who told you that, but they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, the president has said that in terms of territories and stuff, these are things that Zelensky's going to have to decide on. These are things that the Ukrainian side is going to have to agree to. That's all the president is trying to do here is narrow down the open issues, narrow them down, and then see if we can play some role in bringing that closer together so we can stop and end this war once and for all. Look, this war is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. You've seen that in the escalation and the attacks. Russia's economy is now 100% full-time war footing. They are producing munitions. The Ukrainians are as well. Both sides are hitting each other very, very hard. And the war is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So he's trying to do everything he can to bring it to an end. But people that are out there talking what they don't know with all these stupid leaks and things of that nature, they all want to just sound important. They don't know what they're talking about. The president's been very clear. In terms of like what Zelensky's going to agree to, that's up to them to decide. They're going to have to decide what they're willing to give and ultimately what they're going to get, what they're going to demand as well. Both sides are going to, but here's what I can tell you for certain. You can't have a peace deal between two warring factions unless both sides agree to give up something and both sides agree that the other side gets something, right? Otherwise, if one side gets everything they want, that's not a peace deal. It's called surrender. And I don't think this is a war that's going to end anytime soon on the basis of surrender. So this is tough stuff. I mean, it's difficult to bring these two sides together. We made some progress, we believe, and now we'll have to follow up on that progress. And ultimately, where this should lead is to a meeting between the three leaders, between Zelensky, Putin, and President Trump, where we could finalize it. But we got to get this thing closer before we get to that point.
What does Europe want, Secretary?
Well, look, I think the role that Europe can play ultimately in the long term is on security guarantees that Ukraine has been talking about. They should play a key element in that regard. And I also think that Europeans are very helpful being in the room sometimes and sort of giving ideas about, what accommodations can be made and what flexibility the Ukrainian side could have. So that's the role that they've played up to this point. The president invited them to come here. He told President Zelensky to come on Monday and bring European leaders that he chose to bring with him. So there's a handful of heads of state that will be here as well tomorrow at the invitation of the president to see if we can make some progress on some of these points. The president spoke to many of these leaders on the airplane I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning our time. It was probably 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning their time on our way back from Alaska. And and then yesterday I had a call with all the national security advisors of the different countries. So we've got a work agenda ahead of us over the next few days, and we've been talking about these things now for a while as well. So because we also talked to them before, we had multiple meetings and conversations with them leading up to the events in Alaska. So they can play a very constructive role here. But ultimately, only President Trump, if a peace deal is possible, he's the only one that can bring it about.
Is Europe still buying Russian oil?
Well, if you look at the oil that's going to China and being refined, a lot of that is then being sold back into Europe. Europe's also buying natural gas still. Now, there are countries trying to wean themselves off of it, but there's more Europe can do with regards to their own sanctions. If they always talk about sanctions, and they've got a sanctions package coming out as well, but an additional sanctions package supposedly coming out soon. So, but for us, I think the most important role that Europe can play here is to have a constructive role in building up those security guarantees that will allow Ukraine the potential flexibility to make a deal on the rest of the issues that are at stake.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that be a major lever to pull, to put sanctions on Europe or punish Europe for continuing to buy oil and gas from Russia? Is that something on the table?
Well, I don't know about on Europe directly, obviously, but certainly there are implications to secondary sanctions. If you put secondary sanctions on a country, let's say you were to go after the oil sales of Russian oil to China, well, China just refines that oil. That oil is then sold into the global marketplace, and anyone who's buying that oil would be paying more for it, or if it doesn't exist, would have to find an alternative source for it. So we have heard, when you talk about the Senate bill that was being proposed where there's 100% tariffs on China and India, we did hear from a number of European countries, not in press releases, but we heard from them some concern about what that could mean. But look, I don't want to get into a tit for tat with the Europeans on this. I think they can play a very constructive role here in helping us get to that point. But and the president has kept them in the loop. The first call the president made as soon as the meeting with Putin was over was to the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who will be there tomorrow as well. We've been in touch with them over and over again with regards to this process. So I think the president's done an incredible job here of trying to bring the sides together. There's a lot of work that still remains. You don't have a deal, as the president says, until you have a deal. This is not an easy deal. This is not a war that began under President Trump. It's not, as you saw acknowledged at the press conference there in Alaska, it's actually a war that would not have happened had President Trump been in the White House. He inherits a 3-year-old war, and now he's trying to untangle it. And because if this falls apart, this thing's going to get far worse and go on much longer. Thousands and thousands of more people are going to die and be injured as a result of this.
Can you give us any clarity on a timeline in terms of the U.S.'s thinking? I mean, obviously, there's no ceasefire in place right now. What are the repercussions? Are we just going to watch the murders continue?
No, look, at some point, a decision has to be made if a peace deal is possible or not. If at some point it becomes clear that both sides are so far apart and so dug in that we're just not near a peace deal, then the president will have a decision to make about how much more time do we invest in it and what actions does he take then. But I want everyone to understand, if this morning the president woke up and said, I'm putting these terrible, strong sanctions on Russia, that's fine. It may make people feel good for a couple hours, but here's what you're basically saying. You're saying talks are over. For the foreseeable future, for the next year or year and a half, there's no more talks because there's no one else in the world that can talk to him. Okay, Putin's not going to meet with Macron. He's not going to meet with the UK. With all due respect to these leaders, none of these leaders are going to be able to bring him to the table and talk to them. There's only one leader in the world that has any chance of bringing these two sides together. If there is a chance, there's only one leader in the world that can do it, and that's President Trump. And you forfeit that role the minute you put additional sanctions on him. We may get to that point, unfortunately, but if we do, it means that peace talks are no longer possible. And that would be very unfortunate because the real world ramifications are that while we're here calling each other names and doing TV interviews about this stuff and all of that in American politics, there are people who today will be injured and killed in the battlefield and in cities, in Ukraine, on the front lines, and even in Russia. Even as we speak, people that have nothing to do with this war are suffering as a result of it. And I think we are very fortunate and blessed and should be thankful to have a president that has made peace and the achievement of peace a priority of his administration.
For over 3 years, the Russia-Ukraine war has dragged on, claiming countless lives and draining resources. Yet neither Joe Biden nor any other Western leader had the guts to step up and push for a peace deal between these two nations locked in conflict. Instead, what did they do? They poured taxpayer money into arming Ukraine while simultaneously buying oil and gas from Russia either directly or through back channels. Let's be real. Doesn't that sound like funding both sides of the war? And if so, what's the end game here? Why keep the conflict going? Take Britain for example. With the economy tanking and people struggling under skyrocketing prices and declining living standards, both the Tories and Labour kept funneling money into the war. Did they push for diplomacy? No, propping up the conflict instead of seeking a way to end it. Marco Rubio laid it out plain and simple. A peace deal requires both sides to give something up and agree that the other gets something in return. That's not easy. It's a tough, messy process. But by stepping into the gap between Russia and Ukraine, President Trump is showing the courage to try and broker peace when others won't. Unlike leaders like Britain's, who have stuck to the politically safe route of funding the war, Trump is willing to take the heat and push for negotiations. Here's the thing about courage. It's not just talk, it's action. Real courage comes with respect, not necessarily agreement or submission. Rubio said it best. Trump's the only one with a chance of making this deal happen. Because, like him or not, Trump is a leader who makes the tough calls. Putin and Zelensky both know they can't push him around. His courage has been tested under fire and it shows. Contrast that with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who pledged to support Ukraine for 100 years while British veterans sleep on the streets. How does a leader justify that? Why commit to another country's fight for decades when your own people are struggling? Wouldn't it be better to stop the wars and redirect that money to lift up your own citizens? President Trump won the election and boldly claimed he'll end the war in a day. It hasn't happened that fast, and maybe it won't. But here's what matters. Someone finally had the courage to stand up and say, enough. Let's try to stop this. That's the kind of leadership we need. Someone willing to face the storm, take the risks, and fight for peace, no matter how hard the road. If you want a world where conflicts end and lives are saved, it starts with leaders who aren't afraid to act. Share your thoughts in the comment and let's discuss bold leadership and the fight for peace. If you have benefited in any way from this video, please subscribe, like, share, and be sure to leave us a comment.